We Were Never Here is a book that I simply could not put down. Literally, it's one of those just one more chapter, I need to know what happened books. It's a thriller in every sense of the word. Andrea builds a world in which you truly live through the narrator's own fears and insecurities. At the same time as she's trying to keep everything from crashing in around her, you're flipping pages eager to see if she can. It makes you uneasy and invested all at the same time. Andrea's talent for creating such conflicting, condescending characters is incredible, and I am honored to be introducing her. Andrea Bartz received her bachelor's and master's in journalism from Northwestern University, after which she began her career as a Brooklyn-based writer and editor. She is not only an impressive creative writer, but also journalistic. In addition to the resounding praise awarded to her books The Lost Night, The Herd, and What We Are All Here For, We Were Never Here, she is a journalist whose work has been featured in The Wall Street Journal, Vogue, Cosmopolitan, Women's Health, and much, much more. She will be interviewed by Ed Aymar today, so please help me in welcoming Andrea Bartz to the stage.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and I'm so excited to have the chance to talk to Andy Bartz today. I've been a big fan of her work, and We Were Never Here is fantastic and deserves all the praise that it's been getting. In addition, I'm also a fan of her personally and everything that she does for the crime fiction community and beyond. So there's a lot of pressure on you today to really live up to these expectations. We're building you up a lot. So, but I wanted to open first before we started our discussion with a short reading.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Brenna, to the festival, to Ed, whose books are also fantastic and I am confident are for sale in the pavilion today. I am going to do a very brief, just one-page reading from the first chapter of We Were Never Here. So it's not the beginning of the book, but it is from the first chapter. Kristen made everything better, her confidence like a bell jar of security in a strange and gnarled world. When we'd hugged at the airport almost a week ago, tears of relief had coated my eyes. I hadn't seen her in a year pockmarked by panic attacks, nightmares, and screaming into my pillow or the shower or occasionally my fist. But in Santiago, as we'd picked up our rental car and driven north on barren highways, Kristen was her usual boisterous self. She whooped when the Pacific came into view. She honked at a clump of plush alpacas by the side of the road. She pointed and gasped at roadside fruit stands, rippling cornfields with laser-straight rows, fat fields of vegetables growing bushy in the sun. And sky, so much blue sky, almost crackling in its crispness, the way it shot down into the ocean on one side and the crinkled peaks on the other. Her presence was like a calming scent, aerosolized Xanax, and I allowed myself to relax. We spent the first night in La Serena, where we carried leaky ice cream cones around a leafy town square and stayed in a hotel with bright colors on the walls, where paintings of saints watched us as we slept. Too touristy, we decided, and the next morning we drove inland. In Pisco El Key, we took a yoga class from a woman with bowed knees and hip-length hair. As we stood in mountain pose, our chests puffed out, she announced, "Your smile powers your corazón," your heart. On the second night there, 3 college-age guys from Germany cornered us in a bar, and the panic came roaring back like a panther lying in wait. Kristen had taken the lead. She was charming, could talk to anybody. And when she'd noticed the fear in my eyes, she politely disentangled us from the cocky trio and led me back into the night. "It's okay, it's me, I'm here," she kept murmuring as we walked the dark streets back to our hotel. "Kristen's here." Her voice was a balm, her words a weighted blanket. We'd packed up and left the following day. And this morning, we arrived here, in Quiteria. At first, I'd been alarmed by its emptiness. We'd parked in a lot and wandered the hilly streets, our suitcases trailing behind us like dejected toddlers, for what felt like hours before we found an open hotel. There, I scored the keys to a small suite, the duvet damp despite the dry mountain air. The sun was sinking, and I realized the city's vacancy would be an asset. Fewer men to bother us, 2 women walking the streets at night. You know what they say about women traveling alone. Thanks.
Oh, you can applaud, Leia. No, that's worth it.
Thank you. The end.
You know, that excerpt captures so much of what I love about We Were Never Here and your writing, is that you have this gift. And as somebody who's writes thrillers, I find it annoying that you do it so well, of getting a taut sense of story and combining it with these beautiful and unique sense of imagery, and at the same time, these, fascinating character insights. How long does your process take to write a book or to write like a chapter?
To write a chapter. It's so hard to actually say. People also say, like, how many drafts do you have? And I don't have. Also, thank you. That's so kind. I don't really have a clear answer because it just keeps changing. But my basic process is that I write the whole thing quite quickly. I think I wrote this book in about 4.5 months, the first draft. And that's like the vomit draft, or someone told me, stop calling it that. That's so gross. Call it a discovery draft. That's much kinder to your words. So I write this first draft very quickly, but like none of the things that you're saying are there, or they're there in different amounts in the wrong places. And the characters are sort of like paper dolls without real personalities yet. And the motivations don't make sense yet. And the plot has huge plot holes. And then I start revising on my own, and then I give it to beta readers, and I start doing revisions with them, and then eventually it goes to my editor and agent, and do several rounds of revisions with them. So yeah, the actual writing of getting the words down on the page for the first time is quite quick. And then the revising is when things slow down, and I really have to sort of consciously, okay, where's my imagery? Is this too much imagery and not enough happening in this section? Is there enough tension, even though maybe there's just, people sitting in a room and emoting? Like, does it still feel tense and taut? And so that's stuff that comes later.
What about, you mentioned this in the afterword of the book, but can you tell the audience what led to this novel?
Yeah, so this was very much inspired by true events, except for all the murder stuff. Don't worry. But back in 2019, I was on vacation with my friend Jen, and she and I are friends from New York, where I live, but she does live in Australia now. And so she and I would get together, much like the characters in this book, and go to beautiful places together. And so we met up in Chile. We went to Pisco Elqui in the Andes Mountains, and that's something mentioned in this, and then I made up a fake town to actually set the bad stuff in, because I never like to, name a real city with terrible stuff happening. And while we were there, we had no idea it was going to be completely empty. There was just no one else there. We really did walk around for a long time trying to find a hotel that would take us. And there was one other tourist in town, and he was this awesome Australian guy named Stephen. And we bumped into him the first night and just kind of instantly became inseparable. And I think a lot of people know that sort of like vacation friend thing. It's like camp friends. Like, it's time limited, but you just hit it off right away. We spent the entire time as a trio, just the three of us, going stargazing and just doing all the touristy stuff in the area. And he was so cool and sweet and not creepy and respectful that we immediately jumped on a running gag about how we were so trusting, and he was actually a psycho who was just waiting for his chance to kill us and take our money. And just kind of kept, bringing that up as the weekend went on, of like, Steven, you're running out of time. And we were hanging out in the hotel suite that my friend and Jen and I had rented the last night, drinking wine. And again, somebody made a joke about this, and it occurred to me, we'd been making this joke for like 4 days, and I literally for a living imagine women doing horrible things, and yet it had never occurred to me that like Steven should be afraid of us in any way. And so I just kind of like tilted my head, and I was like, Steven, you've known us exactly as long as we've known you, and actually you didn't even watch me pour your wine in the kitchen, so what makes you so sure that like you shouldn't be afraid of us? And there was a long silence, and then he, in his Australian accent, was like, well, I guess I don't know. And somebody was like, that sounds like a book. And sort of the whole idea came out of that. And, to sort of broaden that, to pull back even more, I, before the pandemic, was a travel writer. So I was kind of traveling the world and writing about these different places for different magazines and outlets. And I was doing a lot of that travel solo. And people would say to me, like, oh my God, you went where by yourself? Or like, you know, I wouldn't want my wife to go there. I wouldn't want my daughter to travel there. Or aren't you nervous? Aren't you? And sending me articles from the New York Times that are like, here's how female travelers can avoid getting assaulted. And I just was like, why is it such a default assumption that like, it's up to women to not get attacked, and also women just need to be like the receptacles of violence. Just that's like what it is to be a woman, and we are never allowed or expected to dish it back. And so with the book, I just started asking, what is a realistic scenario where women who are on vacation could be the perpetrators of violence? And this isn't a spoiler, very early in the book, they kill a backpacker in self-defense, and then decide for a variety of reasons that their best course of options is to cover it up and get the hell out of there. And so that sort of kicks off the story, and the walls closing in on them. But yeah, I just had a lot of feelings about sort of violence against women, and the fact that we call it violence against women instead of male violence, and what that means, especially in a travel situation, to, you know, be traveling the world and just existing in a female form.
So, a mutual friend of ours, the writer Jennifer Hillier, she and I were talking about your books, and she said that she always thinks of your books as kind of friendship thrillers or friendship noir. Is that a good description of what you're trying to do in your writing?
Yeah, I love that. You know, this is my third book, and all of mine really focus on complex female friendships. They're about, you know, a group of women, or in this case, two women who are really, really close, really love each other, and they're friends. And some people are like, were they secretly in love with each other? And I'm like, no, you can be this close and be friends. And sort of the reason for that was that when I started writing thrillers, I felt like there's this huge range of thrillers out there, feminist thrillers are written by women, that are all about, sort of all the drama revolves around this primary romantic relationship, right? The woman is the ex-wife, or she is the wife who doesn't really know her husband, or she's, you know, the widower, or she's, the widow, or they're just, you know, she's the mother of this kid. Like, there's really these family relationships that so much of thrillers are based around. And I kind of thought, I was single at the time and had been for most of my 20s, and I was like, I don't have a primary romantic relationship, and yet there's like plenty of juicy relationships in my life that would be fun to explore. So yeah, I sort of, you know, it's I think it only seems exceptional because there aren't more people really focusing on friendships, but I think friendships are so, especially between women, they can be so fraught, they can be so intense, they can be just really juicy. I feel like there's tons of fodder for psychological suspense there.
So in that friendship with your female characters, do you think, is that something that can only be found within the confines of a female friendship?
That's an interesting question. I mean, with Kristen and Emily, they're incredibly close, and they have been since college, so this is like a decade-plus long friendship for them. And sort of part of what bound them early in college, their backstories, their sort of friendship origin story, is that Emily was in a relationship from high school on with this man who was emotionally manipulative and emotionally abusive. And Kristen is the one who sort of lovingly, slowly helped her see that, helped her get out of it. Kristen is literally like, Kristen's bed was where Emily went and slept when she finally left this guy. And so there's something where their relationship from the start is based on them helping each other find the strength to deal with, I'm going to call it, in a sense, male violence instead of like violence against women, right? And that's something that I think only other women and women and genders that don't identify as male, that they can collectively understand and experience. I think even the kindest, most empathetic cis straight dude cannot sort of relate on the same level, and it's not because men are, you know, blind to this or willfully anything. It's because you experience life differently when there is a man next to you, right? Like, you don't get catcalled when you're walking with a guy. You get catcalled when you're by yourself or with another woman. And I say catcalling when it's actually street harassment, a better term for it. So their relationship from the beginning was sort of based on the two of them finding strength in each other. And it was really important for me that their friendship throughout is that it is loving and it is supportive, and there is so much there that's good, because if, Kristen was just a complete evil person from the beginning, and then Emily's just a sucker, and it's not very fun to watch somebody be an idiot. And so I wanted there to be a lot of reason that they would both have a lot to fight for in this friendship, even when the unthinkable happens and they have buried a body, and that could be a very good reason to, keep some distance. And so, yeah, I think it's not fun to read about characters who are just good and evil. I think it's way more interesting to live in that in-between. And, as I was writing it, it's all from Emily's perspective, but I was thinking in every scene, okay, what would Kristen be thinking right now? What would Kristen's motivations be? How would she take, how would she interpret and sort of analyze what's going on right now? Because to me, they're both very human.
Yeah, I mean, they're both so complex and driven, and there's this real sense of love that permeates the story. Is there a, and given how complex they are and how many issues come up in their friendship, particularly gaslighting, and what comes first with you? Is it when you're vomiting up that draft, is it the plot that informs the character, or the characters that inform the plot, or is it kind of a mutual thing?
Yeah. It's a great question. I always start, I am what's called a pantser versus a plotter. So in writing, the plotters have their whole outline before they start writing, and then the pantsers, they write by the seat of their pants. And that's me. I don't know where the story is going as I write it, which is very exciting when there's a twist or something I didn't see. But that is also very stressful when I'm 2/3 of the way through and I'm like, oh my God, I have to land this plane. So with this one, I just started with this premise of these two women who have this dead body in their hotel suite, and this is sort of the secret sauce. This is not the first time that one of their trips has ended in bloodshed, and it's like, one time is bad luck, 2 times is like, what the hell is going on? So I had that as a premise, and I had a very vague idea of their friendship, and it was sort of based on some really deep and intense friendships that I have had in my 20s, and I don't know that there's anyone among us who hasn't been in a codependent friendship or relationship at some point, and so some of that, push-pull of the more sort of dominant friend, and what are they both getting from it. So I had a vague sense. I didn't have either. I had a vague sense of the personalities. I had a vague sense of the premise. And then I wrote, and like I said, there's sort of paper dolls at the beginning. Like the characters are just really outlines throughout that first draft. And as I go, I start to learn more about their backstory. And then that informs decisions that they're making in the present. And so for me, they both kind of develop at the same time. And then by the time I get to the end, I hopefully have a pretty good sense of both. And then I'm like, okay, now back to page 1 to make that match who I now know the characters are and where I now know the plot is going.
When you're writing, do you have in mind an idealized reader?
I guess it's me. No one's asked me that before. I mean, I love...
Thank you.
Well done. I write thrillers because I love reading them. I cannot imagine writing a book that I didn't want to read. And, like I said before, I think my friendships really throughout my 20s, which I generally write about women in their 20s, my friendships were everything. And I wasn't sort of seeing that totally represented in the thriller space. And so, hopefully they can be enjoyed by a whole variety of readers and types of people. But there's a lot of stuff that I'm kind of dredging deep from inside myself. I don't know how people write memoirs, but I put shame on the page, I put embarrassment, I put embarrassing thoughts, I put things that I would never say aloud into my characters, and that's very scary, and that makes some readers just hate the characters, and they just think every character I write is unlikable, and that's absolutely their prerogative, but I kind of challenge myself, I'm going to be really real with who these characters are and the sort of unpleasant things that they think, say, and do and feel. And my hope is that that's going to resonate with other people, and I just have to put it out there and hope And it is really cool. Something that's cool for me is on a Kindle, you can see popular highlights. So you can see other people who have, it'll just show you like a lot of people have highlighted this particular passage. And it is pretty often some of those lines that I thought about deleting because they were just so, ooh, if anyone knew I had ever had that thought, that would not be comfortable.
So let me ask you about you as a writer. Like you're this this fun world traveling writing type, and most writers, not to paint with a white brush, but are nerdy introverts. How's that fair? No, I'm just kidding. That's not the question. Has travel influenced your work and you as a writer? And how so?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is the first one that really has centered travel. Obviously, it starts in Chile, and then most of the action is taking place at home in Milwaukee, where our character goes home to. But there's references to past trips, and there's a trip again at the end. So this was the first time I was sort of taking those like travel writing skills of trying to capture a place and putting them really directly into the book, which was fun because I was writing this in 2020. I think I turned in my first draft April 30th, 2020. So like I was living in this space while I was in my 400 square foot studio apartment in Brooklyn. But I think beyond that, the travel for me really feeds creativity. And I think this is something that's familiar with a lot of people who love travel. Like when you go somewhere new, just seeing stuff you wouldn't normally see, or going to a museum, or just, checking out landscapes that are new to you, and just soaking in all of this newness, this novelty is really inspiring, and just sort of gets your brain off of its little track and thinking of things in a new way. And so I often find that travel is when, for example, if I'm really stuck on a plot problem or just have an idea but I know it's not right yet, it's like when I relax and I'm traveling and just taking in all this other stimulation that it kind of starts to come together. So the pandemic was rough for that. I went to museums once that was doable in my native New York City, and that gave me this hot tip that gave me a very similar sort of stimulation.
So I want to ask, this book is done so well, and I think everybody loves these kind of stories, and I think we have a few writers in the audience, and this is always good to hear. How, what was it like when you found out that Reese Witherspoon had picked We Were Never Here for her book club? Did you talk to her, and is she super cool?
I'll start with the fact that I did not talk to her. So many people are like, did she call you? I'm like, no, Reese does not. Reese did not call me. What happened was I got an email. It was a couple of months before the book came out, not long before the book came out. I got an email from my editor, and the subject line was, "We were never here," and the body said, "Can you give me a call when you have a minute? Thanks." And like, dun, 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 dun. It's like, okay, they're canceling the book, obviously. It's the only thing it could mean. So I called her, and she very kind of calmly explained, like, well, so Reese's book club. And I was like, like still. She's like, yours is going to be the pick for August. And I screamed, oh my God, and started crying on the phone. And it was all so loud that when I came out, my girlfriend, who was here, she was in the next room in the kitchen, and she's like, what's going on? And I was like, my book is gonna be the Reese's book club pick for August. And I love her, she is a data scientist, and she was like, the what pick for what? Which is why we make a good pair. It's like, you're right, okay. And I explained, and we were like, oh yeah, like Legally Blonde, right, okay. Got it all settled. She keeps me, grounded. And it was the next, discussion that day with my editor and agent was like, oh, it's already being printed. Like, it was already on, and actually you might notice that this copy does not have the Reese's seal on it, and it's because a bunch of copies had already been printed, and so they had to get them and put stickers on them. And so when I got this, it had a sticker on it, but I couldn't tell anyone. They were like, if it leaks, it will be revoked. They will choose a new pick, which, like, good Lord. And so to take pictures of the book, which I would do normally, I had to like peel it off and be like, look what's coming, I got my finished copies. So it was just, it still is, like, no words. It still feels very surreal. And I did not get a call from her, but I did get an email from her. And I think it was actually from her. There was a typo in it, and it was like, which makes me think it was like a real thing, you know, like, this is not somebody's. And she just said, so excited, you know, so excited for August. And she said some really nice things about the book. She like loved the relationship. She said that last page still has me thinking. So that was very cool. And then just the day of publication, seeing her holding the book and talking about it was like, my brain just didn't compute. It was like, that's a cool Photoshop trick. Like, who did that?
And I'm sorry, you said her email address is what? It's, so what about when you found out the news about the New York Times bestseller list?
That was a week later. You know, your book comes out on a Tuesday, and then Wednesday nights are when the industry finds out about the next week's bestseller list. And so my book had been out for 8 days. We had seen that it seemed to be selling really well from the metrics that we could tell. It was high on Amazon ranking. It was stuff like that. But I was like, I can't be thinking about it. And my agent called me earlier that day, and I was like, yes. And she was like, I'm just calling. Aren't you like eager to wait? Aren't you just getting? I just can't wait. And I was like, don't call me until there's news. And so right around the time it was supposed to come out, my friend, we live across from a playground, and my friend who has kids, who had no idea any of this was happening. I mean, she knew the book stuff was happening, but did not know of the importance of Wednesdays at 4:45. Texted, and she was like, hey, we're playing at the playground if you want to come join us. And I was like, yes, that is exactly what I want to do. So I went down, and I was like pushing the kids in the swing and like, you know, being distracted. And just then is when my agent called, because she'd gotten it in. And so it was actually cute, because my friend got a photo of me on the phone, just like the biggest, like, pardon my French, shit-eating grin on my face, like just full, like could not even believe my ears. So that was very cool.
And it's being adapted by Netflix.
Yeah.
Is that right? How did that come about? And have you been involved with the adaptation?
Yeah, so that all happened before the Reese news, before the book had come out. Molly Sims, the model and actress, decided she wanted to start a production company, which is a thing you can do if you're Molly Sims. And she had read it. You know, my film agent was like sending it out pre-publication, and she'd read it and was really interested. And at the same time, there was interest from Greg Berlanti Productions, which has an exclusive deal with Netflix, I think. Don't quote me on any of this, but works with Netflix. And so the two sort of independently came upon it, but both liked it and decided teaming up as producers would be a really great way to do it. So I just found out all of this via an email from my film agent, and she was like, and they want to talk to you, so like, let's do a call. So I had a call with these, you know, Hollywood producers and Molly Sims, which she was hilarious. She was great. She's married to the, I think, CEO of Netflix. And so at one point she was like talking about how this will be a priority and they'll be really determined to get it made. And she goes, I mean, I happen to be sleeping with the head of Netflix, so. And I was like, yes. So it was a really, really fun conversation. I loved their vision for it. They told me about some of the changes that they were going to make and how they were going to. There's in the middle of the book, there's kind of the scavenger hunt with a lot of like riddles and stuff. And they were like, yeah, we're really excited to like translate that to the screen and like make that a bigger moment and use that to reveal some stuff. So just hearing like the minds of people whose minds work so differently from mine talk about, you know, adapting this from the screen was really great. And yeah, so I have not been super involved. I sort of gave them my blessing and was like, you go make your art and I will continue to make mine. But they have hired a screenwriter and it's apparently moving along, so I'm very excited to see what they do with it.
So you mentioned continuing your art. What do you have coming up next? And that's actually a two-part question because, you know, you mentioned, you know, that you'd done travel writing and you've written for a lot of publications. Do you want to continue exclusively writing novels, or is there another field you'd like to try?
Next up, my next book is, I'm in revisions right now. I'm deep in the process of trying to make it good, because it's not at first. And that one is going to be coming out early summer 2023, so about a year from now. And I I think going to ease back into travel writing, but the landscape of it has changed, and the books are really sort of where my focus and where my heart is now. What I am interested in is sort of writing books that are a little bit different from my brand, or expanding my brand into different genres. I have this like secret dream of writing horror, which, you know, is adjacent but different. I just think it'd be really fun to write like feminist horror and take all of the horrors of, again, being a woman existing in the world and turn them into these very scary books. So we'll see. I'm talking to my agent about selling some short stories in different sort of outlets. I told my film agent I am interested in TV writing at some point, so she's trying to set up some meetings. So there's all sorts of, you know, ways I want to continue to be creative, and I had a whole career as a magazine editor. Now I'm doing this book thing. I get really freaked out by the idea of doing any one thing for like decades and decades. Like my attention span is too short, so I am loving it right now, and then I'm sort of leaving open-ended, like what's going to be, how things are going to look in 5 or 10 years.
So one of the things that, you know, I mentioned at the beginning that I'm a big fan of you personally, and you've been real voice in crime fiction and in writing for issues related to social justice. How does that tie into your writing, and do you try and consciously marry the two together with your novels, or do you try and keep them separate?
I think it's impossible for me to keep this stuff truly out of my books because they're all coming from my brain, right? They're coming from like the way that I see the world. And so when people ask like, oh, do you write feminist books? Is this feminist art? And I'm like, well, I identify as a feminist, so I guess that means that my art is feminist as well. I tend to write about like cool girls who live in cities, and like it's, the settings and things sort of lend themselves to like more progressive or liberal leaning main characters like myself. And I don't try to on the nose, be putting out these sort of social messages or fighting for social justice. I try to just more get people thinking about and talking about, maybe who wouldn't already be thinking about talking about some of these issues, like sexism in travel, like violence against women, and why are we calling it violence against women, and why is it such a given and an assumption, and we don't even question it? Why is it on women's backs to, keep themselves from being assaulted? So I try to sort of work through these themes that I think about a lot and find interesting. And then in smaller ways, I try to just put in these little Easter eggs that people maybe don't notice, like, in The Lost Night, there's a point where someone's talking about a gender reveal, and someone else is like, it's a sex reveal, and the other character's like, what? And they're like, well, we're not going to know that kid's gender until they're like at least 15. So you might agree or disagree. It's characters saying that, but just thinking like, why do we call it a gender reveal? Like, babies don't have genders yet. Like that's a construct that develops later. So little things that hopefully are sort of Trojan horsing some progressive ideas into all of the readers of America who would be interested in this genre.
So we're going to take questions in a moment, but I had one last question. What's been the best moment of your writing career?
Oh my gosh. Right now, Ed.
Yeah. Thank you again.
Yeah, I mean, probably publication day or publication week, this isn't one moment, of my very first book, The Lost Night, back in 2019. It was pre-COVID, so we were able to, have the book launch, and tons of people showed up, and it just felt, I was like, this must be what weddings are like. It's like, you look out at the audience, and it's so many people that you love and care about, and everyone was just so happy. So I guess I'm going to go with the launch party in 2019, and just being like, it's real. I can hold it.
When you said you love and care about the audience, are you saying you love and care about the audience here?
I look
you
out,
kind of
and
indicated
all of you are invited to my Sunday wedding. Every single one of you.
So we are going to take questions. If you have a question, we ask that you use the microphone right over here or on that side over there. So any questions from the audience?
If you just come up to the microphone, please. Either one of them.
Don't be shy. Oh, here we go.
Hello. So one of my favorite things about this book is just that opening paragraph. I think it's such I just read it when it first came out. I picked it up. It was at the bookstore I was working at, and I read the first paragraph, and I was like, what the heck? This is awesome. So kind of what went into, crafting that opening, what was your thought process going into that? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. The first paragraph. So here's the crazy thing: when I'm writing these books, like I said, I don't have an outline, and yet later my subconscious has somehow, in like bumping along, has planted all these things that become relevant later. So I actually wrote that was in like the sample that I used for my editor to sell the book. I had to write kind of a treatment, sort of just describing the hook, like a one page, and then I wrote I think it was like 25 pages that pretty much ended up being the first 25 pages, and that was always the first paragraph. So that was just sort of what like tumbled out of my head first, and it really wasn't until I think the book was like, I swear to God, printed, and somebody was like, oh, the foreshadowing in that first paragraph, and I was like, huh, yeah, you're right, there it is, yeah. So just, I guess my head was 20 steps ahead of me. Thanks.
Okay.
Ed's gonna start doing stand-up.
Oh
if
yeah,
we don't
you
get
have one
more.
right there.
This is a little off topic, but I was just thinking about that 400 square foot apartment. Are you going to stay in that small space? Can you live in that small space for a very long time?
You know, it never felt small until the pandemic. Until A, the pandemic, and then B, somehow the condo board or whatever continued to get special clearance for them to rip down the balconies that were on the side of the building. So not only was I trapped in, it's 380 square feet, not only was I trapped in a shoebox, but the wall was shaking. They were jackhammering into the side of the building. So because of that, I got the heck out of Dodge and went and stayed with some friends in Oxon Hill, Maryland, for a few months, which was a lovely place to be sort of marooned. And then when I came back, I moved. So I am no longer in the 380 square foot studio. My partner and I are now in a 2-bedroom in a, leafier, less cool area, and it's much better for my mental health. But yeah, when I could just leave and go to bars and go to coffee shops, it didn't feel small. But the pandemic scrambled everything up.
Yeah.
So I guess with We Were Never Here and any other book, like what goes into choosing the actual title, and like what made this be the one?
Yeah, great question. So this one changed a bunch. When I was writing it, my working title was The Visitors, and I always liked that, but my editor said it wouldn't work because it sounded too sort of sci-fi, which is fair. It kind of evokes like Wanderers, the Chuck Wendig book. And then we were just kicking around a lot. I really liked women traveling alone. I thought that was kind of from that paragraph that I read. I thought that was sort of intriguing, and my editor was like, well, I don't get it, because if it's women with an E, then they're not alone. And I was like, she's brilliant. She ever hears me using that voice. She's great. And so we kicked around a bunch, and I just went back through the book and was just pulling out phrases. Like my other books, The Lost Night and The Herd, were the something. So this is the first time I had an actual phrase for a title. But it was already in the manuscript, a moment of like complete denial of what had just happened, and I thought it sort of had worked with the themes. So yeah, of like the 6 I sent over in that email after God, who knows how many we tried to brainstorm. Both my agent and editor were like, that's the one. We like it.
Yeah. We have a question over there.
So with Reese's book club, does she give you the questions ahead of time so you have a chance to think about answers, or just get asked on the spot?
So let me just repeat it for the audience. So the question is for Reese's book club, does she give the questions ahead of time, or not?
So, as I said, I found out a couple months ahead, and then I got looped in with the Reese's Book Club team, which, like, it's probably about 6 people, and, like, there is not a harder working group of people. They're all under Hello Sunshine, her production company. And so from the start, we were sort of working hand in hand for, like, okay, what are the things we can do together this month that will be cool and special? And I pitched them a bunch of ideas, including, like, what if we do a digital scavenger hunt? Because, again, scavenger hunts are, like, a theme in the book. And don't worry, I will answer your question, getting to it in a roundabout way. and I pitched that, and they were like, great, let's work together on that. And so we made Instagrams and TikToks that sent you to different corners of the internet. And so from the start, they were very clear about, they're so organized and such a well-oiled machine. It was like, this is what we will need, this is what da-da-da-da. And I knew that I was never in direct touch with Reese, and I knew that at the end of the month I would be in a digital, virtual book club, a Zoom that whoever wanted to join from the community could join. They paired me up with Megan Miranda, a wonderful thriller author who was also a former Reese pick, and she asked the questions of me. So I think she personally, Megan Miranda, reached out and was like, do you want to go over the questions first? And I was like, no, unless it's anything weird, I'm pretty fine just chatting freely. And so I sort of had done enough, virtual events too at that point to sort of know what to expect. But I will say that was probably within this book one of the coolest moments, was just sitting there and watching the room. They had the waiting room, in Zoom, and just watching the waiting room fill up of hundreds of people who were all there to discuss the book from all over the world was just very that was definitely a pinch me moment.
That's so
for sure.
That's so cool. Any other questions? I think we have time for a couple more. Or oh yeah, go ahead.
All right, well, he'll repeat. Yeah.
I'll repeat it.
Regarding the scavenger hunt, how did you come up with those types of clues, and do you do scavenger hunts on your own?
So regarding the scavenger hunts in the book, how did you come up with those types of clues, and do you do scavenger hunts on your own?
So, a great question. I really don't. I don't really do riddles and stuff, but I was always pretty good at them. In the newspaper every day, I would when I was a kid, I would sit down with the comic section, and as I had my cereal, I would look at the jumble. They have jumble, and I would be train, breakfast, nema, 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 and my mom would be like, good Lord. So my brain has always worked that way, and I think that's part of why I write thrillers, is that I like sort of the puzzle element of them and the moving pieces and the sort of, machinations, and it feels like a big Rube Goldberg machine in my head. And so I just thought it would be fun to write a scavenger hunt, and I also thought it would be fun. It would be and I'm sure can relate. When you're writing, you're writing is the worst thing I've ever done in my life. I hate the writing stage. You're staring at the blank page. You're oh my God, I have to do this again tomorrow. And so when you have an idea that's just gonna fill up 5 to 10 pages, even if it doesn't have that much to do with the plot, you're wee! And so I spent a week just tearing through it, having so much fun. And yeah, it was just fun for me to come up with these weird, different ways. It wasn't modeled on anything else, but just different ways to, express clues. And then I got to the end and I had to scale it way back and make it more creepy and relevant and move the plot forward in some way. My first beta reader was you need to cut all this. It doesn't belong in a thriller. And thank God, I was I'm going to take your note and figure out a way to keep it and make it work, because I really liked it. And luckily, other people have really liked it too. But I think it's just my brain works that way. And so it was a fun way for me to fill pages and sort of make puzzles with myself. And then with the Reese team, I was yeah, I get to do it again. And now I'm sort of I never get to do that again. You really can't. I can't just throw another scavenger hunt in my next book. That was it.
Yeah, 2 more questions, I guess. So go ahead if you want to go.
So, prior to writing the first novel, I guess you said you did travel writing. So, was there a point where you said, I'm tired of traveling and I want to sit down and write a novel, or writing a novel is something you really want?
Yeah, no.
So, was there a point where when you were travel writing, when you sort of got sick of it and wanted to write a novel? Was writing a novel something you always wanted to do?
Yeah, so I had so many trips planned for 2020. So the only reason I stopped travel writing was because of the pandemic. I actually started working on this novel, on my very first novel, when I was still on staff as a magazine editor. And in my career as a magazine editor, I kept being at magazines that folded. They kept disappearing while I was there. And now, I worked at Glamour, I worked at Self, I worked at, so many of the magazines I worked at are no longer in print. And so it happened again. And I was like, okay, time to start looking for a new job, which is what I had done all the other times. And I was like, while I'm looking for a job, what if I like kind of buckle down on this manuscript, this like, you know, document that's just hanging out on my computer with maybe 10,000 words written. And I decided to take it seriously because I was like, I need something in my life that like nobody can take away from me. Like I'm not gonna wake up one day and like Microsoft Word tells me like, nope, you're done. I was like, I am in control of this. So I sort of doubled down and worked really hard on it during that period. And then when I sold it, and at that point I was travel writing, the travel writing had really picked up, and I was kind of like, why would I look for a new full-time job when I can focus on the books and do the travel writing? And so that was sort of my two pieces up until the pandemic, when writing became the soul. Book writing became kind of the sole thing.
All right, and we have one last question.
When you were a kid, what kind of mystery books did you read?
So what kind of mystery books did you read when you were a kid?
So I didn't even read mystery so much. I read like scary books. I loved like Goosebumps when I was too young for it. I loved like Lois Duncan and Christopher Pike and R.L. Stein and some of that sort of mysteries too, wrapped up in that. And then I started reading Stephen King when I was way too young to be reading Stephen King. I mean, my mom is a huge reader, and so we just had a house packed with books, and it was like, any book you want to pick out, we will not stop you. And they also had this policy that they didn't like give me money to buy things, but they were like, anytime you want a book anywhere, you can, we will get you that. Like, we want to support your reading. And so I read a whole big range of things. I mean, I love Babysitter's Club too, but I really love the Babysitter Club mysteries. But I think like the scary books were, the ones that, really scary stories to tell in the dark, and all those creepy ones were speaking to my like sweet little soul even then. And now it comes back out.
All right, well, I want to thank Andy for today. It was so good to talk with you, and I really appreciate how open you are with and enthusiastic and honest you were in your answers. So thank you so much for coming down to Gaithersburg.
Thank you so much, dear.